Hello there. Welcome to Management 4175, Strategic Management. Today we're going to be talking about external analysis, Chapter 3 in your textbook. We're going to be building on what we started in previous sessions where we were looking at how to do strategic planning, and we had laid out this roadmap of steps to strategic planning, which leads to good, effective strategic management. And we started with purpose. So why does our business exist? What's its mission? What's its vision? Really understanding who we are as a business and why we're here. We moved on then a little bit to talk about objectives. So we set our objectives, broad, long-term aims that align with that vision, mission, and purpose, and started talking about the next level down where we would begin to set physical goals. In order to do that, however, we need to understand the environment that we're working in. And that environment has two main components to it, our internal environment. So what do we look like as a business? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And then externally, what do we look like? What's the market look like? What does the environment look like generally also? So that purple cloud in the background here on our model is all of what we're doing in strategic management, strategic planning is operating with those traits and characteristics in mind in the internal and external environment. So we're going to talk about the external environment. Our objectives today are begin to evaluate the impact of external macro environmental trends on the industry. We'll use a tool called a PESTLE analysis. That will help us understand that macro overall. We'll also learn how to use Porter's Five Forces tool. So Michael Porter, an expert in the field of strategic management and business modeling in general, be able to define those five forces in an industry, evaluate them in an industry, draw out the implications of those five forces for analyzing a specific firm inside that industry, and being able to evaluate whether or not to enter an industry based on that analysis, and be able to understand how to maximize our performance inside that industry. And then last but not least, we're going to learn how to analyze specific strategic groups and plot them on another tool called a strategic group map. So those are the three things that we hope to do with today's session. So I have a question to start with. We'll think about this real quick. What's the number one reason CEOs are fired? Is it they fail to develop strategies? So they just don't sit down and take the time to figure out where they're going, or they fail to accomplish the strategies they develop. Which do you think? Fail to develop strategies or fail to accomplish the strategies? Well, studies have shown that it's that they fail to accomplish the strategies. So some may actually go and develop their strategies, but if they fail to accomplish them, then we have to ask the question, why do they fail to accomplish them? And studies will show that really what they've done is they've tried to set up strategies, but they've disconnected them from the reality of what's happening outside and inside their business. So they haven't coupled up their desire, their passion for achieving that purpose with reality, what's happening outside their company, what's happening inside their company. So we're going to talk today about environmental analysis, but we're going to start with the external environment, and we're going to talk about it in two forms. We're going to talk about it in our general environment, so that's where we're going to use our PESTLE tool, and we're going to talk about it in global terms and using Porter's diamond. We also want to talk about the competitive environment, industry environment, the task environment, what the industry that we're working in looks like, what are the strategic groups. So we're going to look at it in general, and we're going to look at it competitively, externally to our business. Next time, when we get into the next chapter, we're going to talk about the internal environment, where we're going to analyze what does our business look like, what are our strengths and weaknesses, capabilities, all of those things that are mentioned here on the slide. But today we're going to focus on external, and we're going to look at two different forms, the general and the competitive environments. The general environment is kind of what it sounds like. It is generally what am I operating in as a business? And the main way to think about this is these are factors that the firms cannot control directly. So there are things that exist that we don't have a lot of ability to impact or control. Uh, and we use the PESTLE acronym, the PESTLE tool, to look at that. So P, political, E, economic, S, social, cultural, sometimes known as demographic, T, technological, E, environmental or ecological, and L for legal. We're going to go into each of those in a little bit more detail. Our fundamental issue, though, that we're looking at in overall is what is our strength? What factors do we have strong, mediate, or weak, and what positive and negative factors do we see? Because we want to have strategies then that either leverage those that we have strengths on or attempt to mitigate those that we have weaknesses on. So the implications from that factor strength in the factors is what effect does it have on our firm and on our industry, and what value or what can it do um, to help our business in that industry. So that's what we're going to kind of take a look at. The PESTLE analysis, just what I said. This is a nice, pretty, colorful chart, basically so that it sticks in your mind what PESTLE is: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. And you can see from the gray boxes on this chart what each of those are. I'm going to take a little bit of time with each of them now and talk about them in more detail. Politically, political forces are, let me just go across the top here. Political forces are how government actions and political conditions affect the business environment. Economic is economic conditions as well as trends, as well as activity, and how that affects my organization's ability to perform. Societal or social examines the societal trends and behaviors, so demographic dynamics. Technological, how do new technologies alter business landscapes and operational efficiencies? Environmental, what's the impact of ecological factors on business operations and regulations? And then legal, scrutinizing the effects of legislation and legal systems on our business practices and obligations. So if you think about all of these together, this is the general environment that every business, all businesses have to operate inside of. It impacts different industries in different ways, but we all have that impact, and they're all things that we can't necessarily directly control or impact. So political, just to give some examples of what political forces might look like. So things that have to do with the political landscape: tort reform, acts that happen. So things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, deregulation of utilities or other industries, increases in minimum wages, taxation at different levels, legislation on corporate governance reforms, consumer protection laws, and I probably should have on each of these charts, et cetera, because this is not an attempt to list everything that might impact. But if you think about all of these things, none of them can we impact directly, but all of them could have an impact on our ability to do business effectively. Economic forces, there's hundreds of measures out there: interest rates, unemployment rates, consumer price index, gross domestic product changes and trends, changes in stock market valuations, stock market trends, you name it. Again, there's an et cetera on this chart. So all of these things economically can impact my business, can impact my industry in a positive and negative way. Social, cultural, or demographic forces, things like more women in the workforce today than there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Increases in the use of temporary workers. Greater concerns for fitness is a demographic force. It changes the way your workforce wants to work. Greater concern for the environment. Postponement in family formation until later in years. An aging population. Rising affluence, changes in ethnic compositions, geographic distributions, greater disparities in income levels. And again, there are hundreds of other forces that are out there. Technological, genetic engineering, the internet technology. Let's add into that artificial intelligence, CAD/CAM, computer-aided design, manufacturing, maintenance, all the different things. Research in synthetic and exotic materials, pollution, global warming, miniaturization, wireless communication, nanotechnology, again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things, again, can impact my business, can impact my industry and my ability to work inside of that environmental impact on operations and of operations, the environmental impact of a specific product or service, natural resource availability. And we hear a lot about the impact of artificial intelligence on water, for example, on power consumption, for example, climate change, environmental regulation, recycling, etc. And then last but not least, again, finally, legal forces. So what's happening out there in the legal landscape? Pretty much every day you can open a newspaper and find different rulings that have happened at all of the different local, state, federal levels having to do with legalities of different laws, as well as laws that are being passed. Property rights, intellectual property rights, big thing. Regulations, example would be like occupational occupational safety and health administration, OSHA, non-discrimination, case law, all of these legal forces. So you can begin to see how some of these things might have impact. There are places to go to look for these general trends. I mean, you can go, for instance, on the economic front, you can go and look at all sorts of different economic measures that are out there, but some that are maybe a little less easy to look for are Global Peace Index. So gains in health and education, wealth gap widening. Here's a source. Vision of Humanity is a good source to go look at some of the things that are happening globally that would fall into that general environment. Another would be Transparency International, particularly if you're doing business internationally. It's good to know who you're dealing with, what different countries and communities act like, behave like, and Transparency International does the corruption perceptions. These are just two sources. There's, again, hundreds of sources out there to go look. But having the awareness of what's happening in your general environment is very important when you're setting strategies for your business going forward. So let's shift to the next way. So you're looking general. Now let's go a little more specific. Let's look competitively at my industry. What does that environment look like? And sometimes that's called the task environment. It includes all of the competitors in my market. It includes the customers that are being serviced by my market. It includes the suppliers that are providing materials and service and products to my business. And it includes things like substitutes coming in, replacement types of things that are coming in. And we are going to use a tool called Porter's Five Forces just because it gives us a structure to go look at that competitive environment. The five forces looks just like this. Right in the middle is the rivalry, which is the market that you're working in. It's where all of my competitors exist. What's the rivalry look like between us? There are always dynamics of competition between different players in a market. And then top to bottom, what power do our suppliers have in our market? So as an example, chip manufacturers, not potato chip, silicon chips, they have a lot of power in industries where they're providing very scarce technologies. The buyer and customers can have a lot of power when it's a low demand kind of a market where one player or two or three players have the most impact on that demand. Then we look side to side. We have a threat of potential new entrants in our market, and we have a threat of substitutes in our market. So all of these things, that supplier and buyer power, that substitute and new entrant power, crunch that rivalry, so they impact our ability to do strong business inside of our. Another picture of this would look like this. Again, industry competitors in the middle, suppliers and buyers on the outside, potential interest and substitutes. The key here is the bargaining power, the line there between the supplier and the industry and competitors in each of the four areas. So the bargaining power, the threat of new entrants, the threat of substitutes, and the bargaining power of the buyers as well as suppliers. So if we think about it, again, a supplier can exert power by threatening to raise prices or reducing the quality or quantity, can cause a scarcity condition. Supplier group will be powerful when these potential things can happen. Bargaining power of buyers. Buyers can threaten industry by trying to force down prices, by bargaining for higher quality. I used to work in the aerospace and defense industry, and particularly in our commercial aviation um, market, the big players in the market, the Boeings and the Airbuses, continually year over year raise their expectations for higher quality, rightfully so. But that uh, because of their size and because of their impact on our market, they could impact our market, they could impact our rivalry very, very easily. Buyer group is powerful when it has a concentrated volume or purchases large volumes. The buyer faces a few switching costs. So there are a lot of different reasons why a buyer group could be powerful. Threat of new entrants. So if there's a big new entrant into the market, again, going back to my aerospace and defense, long time ago, before cell phones, GPS was usually on a specific separate unit, a GPS unit, and initially GPS was provided by kind of high cost aerospace and defense military kind, so it was a very high cost. At one point in time, Garmin, who still exists today, entered into that market and began to provide a low cost alternative, maybe a slightly lower quality, but not only marginally so. But it allowed the market to expand and the price point to come down. So they had that new entrant had a remarkably large impact on the market itself. A threat of substitute products. Provides the same function, product, or service. So back to my GPS example, the separate GPS units and the Garmin units, even those went away for the most part. You still have a few of them in things like fish finders and that kind of thing. But when cell phones came on, now I have on my phone, I have GPS capability to be able to provide directions and locations for anywhere. So that was a substitute product that had a huge impact on the competitive rivalry in that particular market. And then inside the rivalry, you can imagine this jockeying for position, price competition, advertising, new product introductions, increased customer service or warranty commitments, all sorts of different things. So that rivalry inside. So again, thinking about what we just talked about, we have a general, everybody has to live with environment in the external environment. And we have this competitive environment, this market environment, this tactical environment that companies need to work with. So externally, we have to think about these things. Another way to look at this is to think about a tool called a strategic group map. Strategic groups inside an industry, there's two assumptions that get made. No two firms are totally different. No two firms are exactly the same. So there are strategic groups within an industry. Let's think about one. Let's talk about athletic shoes. Okay. There are different brands, right, inside the shoe market that have their own specialties. They're not exactly the same, but they're not totally different either. They're all marketing to similar groups that crossed over. So you have to work both sides in this. These appear over time. So, we start off maybe with a single product manufacturer and eventually competitors enter the market, strategic groups begin to appear. And they are clusters that share similar strategies then. So breadth of product, price and quality, type of distribution system. There'll be different groups now that begin to leverage different components of that market, and they'll share similar strategies. They'll still have to differentiate. We know that, but they will be similar. An example, let's go past this. An example might be retail chains. So think about Walmart, all right, lower right-hand corner in this strategic group map. It has a large, broad geographic coverage, so lots of different localities, but it has low price and quality. That's what it's known for, low prices, everyday prices. And then in the upper left-hand corner, very different, Gucci, Chanel, Burberry, Louis Vuitton, high price and quality expectations, but very few localities. You don't see a Gucci store in every town. You see it in very select locations. And you can see by the size of the bubble on the strategic group map, the size of the overall revenue of the market they're addressing. So Walmart's is a much larger market than Gucci. Very few people, or relatively fewer people, are in that market than are in the Walmart market. So a couple of things to note on this. The axes are not the same. So strategic group maps can have just about anything that your group considers to be important. In this case, they chose price and quality versus geographic coverage, but you could choose service capability versus price, or quality versus cost, or whatever you would like to choose for those axes, whatever's important in your business. Another example might be the business strategy game that we're going to be running later. Uses that athletic shoe model that we talked about. And in this case, they chose to use price and quality, basically the SQ rating. You're going to get much more familiar with that. But price and SQ is the left axis, and product line breadth is the y-axis. And you can see that there's differentiation that has to happen, and you'll find how important that is when we play the game. So strategic group maps are a way to go visually take a look at where my business fits inside of it's my competitive market. It's just a tool that we can use to go look at that. So, we talked about 3 tools today. We talked about the pestle analysis. We talked about Porter's 5 forces, and we talked about the strategic group map. Hopefully that gives you a little bit better idea of how to externally evaluate the environment that your business is working on. Thank you, and take care.